The best-known government responses to the UFO question were the much-publicized U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book and the Condon Report. In spite of the Air Force's public statements to the contrary, a close examination of the evidence in these reports indicates that some UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft, and that the purpose of these reports was to act as public relations cover-ups rather than scientific studies.
John Greenwald is an amateur historian. He spent nearly 2 decades requesting declassified information from the U.S. government regarding unidentified flying objects. And he recently posted more than 100,000 pages of documents to the internet for all to see and examine. Didn't take long for those documents to vanish from his website. The reason was called copyright infringement. But of course, people think there's more to the story than just that. It's a pleasure to welcome into MidPoint nuclear physicist and a veteran lecturer on UFOs. He's author of the book Flying Saucers and Science. A scientist investigates the mysteries of UFOs, interstellar travel crashes, and government cover-ups. Stanton Friedman joins us. Dr. Friedman, thank you so much for being here.
Mister, please, no free degrees.
I always like to just in case, I always think it's always good to throw one in. Thanks so much for joining us in here. What is it about Project Blue Book that to this day, and all of these various reports and ideas, that still captivates people every single time they hear it? Everybody wants to just learn a little bit more, and they're always curious.
Yes. Well, frankly, what's interesting here is these documents have been available for a long time, but they weren't in a searchable internet kind of format. And much more important, even though there's some very exciting data in the old Project Blue Book, what we now know, which we didn't know many years ago, was that Blue Book was canceled as a result of a memo from an Air Force general in 1969 saying that reports of UFOs which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system, which is an amazing statement. I spoke with General Bolender, and he agreed there are 2 separate channels. We've only heard about the first one, the civilian reports, the not very exciting reports, but the reports which could affect national security. And the example I used to him, say a saucer going down the runway as Strategic Air Command base where nuclear weapons are stored, obviously a matter of national security, goes someplace else. And he agreed entirely. But the Air Force has never made that statement. He made it in a special assignment. What should we do about Project Blue Book? And we didn't even see that memo for 10 years. So the real world of what information is available is very different from what we've been told by the United States Air Force. Not only the Air Force, the National Security Agency. You remember those guys.
Yes, I do.
NSA, no such agency. They released way back in the early 80s 156 top secret Umbra UFO documents. One little problem. You could read 1 sentence per page. Everything else was whited out. The CIA has made us aware that there are dozens of top secret old UFO documents. They blacked out almost everything except a few words per page.
Then let me ask this then, Mr. Friedman. What is the government afraid of?
Well, I think they're afraid of several different things. The first reason for security in this issue would be to try to find out how saucers work. We do have wreckage from Roswell, from Aztec, New Mexico. You want to figure out how they work. Rule number 1 for security, and I worked under security for 14 years.
And you were an original civilian investigator at Roswell, correct?
Yes, I am. I was. Well, I still am, I guess. The rule number 1 for security is you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. You know, because they read newspapers and listen to the radio and television too. Let me turn off this noise. Sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Second problem is, what if the other guy, and every country's got another guy, you know, India and Pakistan, us and the Russians, etc. What if they figure out how they work before we do? You don't want them to know. We know. They know. Weapon, counter-weapon, counter-weapon. Third problem is, if you make an announcement tomorrow by highly trusted individuals, a little hard to find, but let's say the Queen and the Pope, that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Remember, the question isn't, are all UFOs, only are some. Are all isotopes fissionable? No, but as a nuclear guy, I'm glad uranium some uranium isotopes are. The problem then, what happens if such an announcement were to be made? I think church attendance would go up, mental hospital admissions would go up, the stock market would go down. But I think one of the biggest things that would happen, and this is a real problem, is that the younger generation, who unlike me was never alive when there wasn't a space program, would immediately push for a new view of ourselves instead of as Russians, Americans, Chinese, Greeks, Earthlings.
Well, let me do this then, because I got about 2 minutes left. I want to make sure I get this in with you. With all this information then that this new generation would have, and all the information that we're gathering about stars and about planets, about those potentially sitting in the Goldilocks zone, such as the Earth is, where life could survive, isn't it just logical then that whether you believe in flying saucers or not, that the evidence is there has got to be life out there other than just us here on Earth?
Well, yeah, our ego gets in the way. The question isn't whether there's life out there. How do you tell unless you go out there? But is there life coming here? And there is overwhelming evidence. I cite 5 large-scale scientific studies, and 98% of the people in the audience haven't read any of them. So the data is there. And one does research by investigation, not by proclamation, which is what the debunkers do.
Is it the biggest thing that you have in your way right now to make sure that people take this seriously? There is a serious investigative side to this.
Yes. And I've given over 700 lectures in 50 states, 10 provinces, and 18 other countries. I've had 11 hecklers. 2 of them were drunk, and the audience took care of the rest. So people are quite willing and ready and able to listen to the evidence if they bother to listen or look or read it. That's the problem, getting people who say there's nothing to it to recognize that they don't know what they're talking about.
I will agree with you in this, that when we launched this show, we told ourselves that we would question absolutely everything. We will continue to do this. And there are a lot of people out there who believe, and there are a lot of people out there who don't, but you still have to be able to talk to them and get them to read and get them to learn a little bit more about what's going on. I agree with you. I want to point out to everybody again, the book is called Flying Saucers and Science. A scientist investigates the mysteries of UFOs, interstellar travel, crashes, and government cover-ups. Stanton Friedman is our guest. Mr. Friedman, thank you so much for being here. Hey, promise me we'll do this again.
I look forward to it.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much. Hey, just when you thought it was safe to consider the Keystone Pipeline was all about Democrat versus Republican, now comes word of a more sinister involvement from the bare-chested dictator. You'll hear this report and a whole lot more when we continue right here on MidPoint, where it makes no difference what the subject is. We will question everything.